Good morning. Welcome to this virtual forum of Democratic candidates for Montgomery County Executive, sponsored by Bethesda Beat and Bethesda Magazine. Thank you for joining us. We are recording this event. The recording will be posted on BethesdaMagazine.com and distributed to all registrants. I'm your moderator, Ann Talent, Executive Editor of Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat. We are part of ZPop Media, the leading media company in Montgomery County. Since 2004, Bethesda Magazine has shared important and compelling stories about the people and issues in Montgomery County, as well as guiding you to make the most of what our region has to offer. Bethesda Beat is a local site covering breaking news and key issues, not just in the Bethesda area, but across the county. We focus on county education, county government, and public safety, plus dining and development. At Bethesda Beat and Bethesda Magazine, we strive to serve, connect, and celebrate our community. We're proud to sponsor this forum and provide a means to explore important issues and give you, the voters, a window into the positions and approaches of those who aspire to make our laws, spend taxpayer money, and operate our county government. Now I'm going to hand the floor to Lee McDonald, our membership director, for an important announcement.
Thanks, Ann. Good morning, everyone. As Ann said, my name is Lee McDonald, and I manage Bethesda Beat's membership program. We now have over 1,500 members, and we're so thankful for each and every one of you that have taken a stand for our quality local journalism. Each month, we serve over 350,000 readers, and that means that less than 1% of our readers financially support our work. As many of you have heard, our spring campaign kicked off this week. It's one of the key ways that we raise funds for our newsroom throughout the year. We're grateful for the readers who have contributed to our campaign so far, but we still have a long ways to go. So if you find this event and all of our coverage valuable, please consider becoming a member. I'm going to drop a link in the chat, so keep a lookout for that. All right, Ann, thanks for letting me pitch. Back to you.
Thanks, Lee. Today, we're delighted to hear from the 5 candidates for the Democratic nomination for County Executive about a range of important topics. We're looking forward to an informative discussion. For the first portion of the forum, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question and will have 30 seconds for rebuttal if they wish. Once the candidate has 15 seconds left on the clock, I will flag them. At the end of the allotted time, the candidate will be permitted to finish his sentence. If he continues to speak past that, he will be muted by the host. For the questions selected from the live chat, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question and 30 seconds for rebuttal if they wish. Candidates, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom if you want to rebut so we can see you. Now I'm pleased to introduce the candidates, David Blair, Mark Elrich, Tom Hucker, Peter James, and Hans Reamer. For introductions, we'll begin in alphabetical order, and then we'll switch it up as we go along. Let's begin with each candidate introducing himself in 1 minute or less. We'll start with Mr. Blair for opening remarks. 1 minute.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. So I'm a lifelong Montgomery County resident and grew up in Darnestown. And no doubt I was blessed to grow up here. My mom was a public school teacher, and she used to say to me as a kid growing up, David, when a door opens up for you, it's your duty to reach back and pull the next person through. And I very much believe that that aligns with the values of Montgomery County. I know we could be doing better. And this county is incredible because while I'm a lifelong resident, we've attracted the best and brightest from around the country and from around the world. We have the funds, we're one of the richest counties, and what we're missing is executive leadership. And that's what I bring to the equation here. It was how we were able to build a Fortune 500 company in Rockville, Maryland. As an executive, you're surrounding yourself with the best talent, you're setting ambitious goals, you're holding people accountable, you're removing obstacles. And that's what I'm gonna do for the county, so I can move this county forward for all. Again, thank you for joining us this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Elrich. You're muted.
So good morning, everybody. And I'm looking forward to this opportunity again to talk with you about some of the things we're doing in the county and some of the things we hope to do going forward. My first term as county executive has not been what I expected, but with the support of our great residents, we followed the science and did better than almost anywhere else in the country. At the same time, we've been planning for a post-COVID future, and we've done it with an eye on equity. I recently sent my latest budget to the county council, which is the first budget in 3 years that isn't an austerity and constrained budget. It's forward-looking. It addresses many things that all of us have had to defer over the last 3 years of limited revenues. And the best news is that this budget doesn't require federal funding or new taxes to be balanced. I've kept my campaign promise and invested in early childhood education. I'm providing record funding for our schools, and we're addressing climate change with legislation, with a path to countywide clean energy purchasing, with clean vehicles, microgrids, and solar panels, and with increased public transit every way we can.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks so much, Ann, and for having us. It's great to be here. I'm a parent of 2 boys in public school, and my concern for their future and their classmates in our declining and increasingly inequitable and overcrowded schools, who are all facing fewer jobs and less housing when they get out, led me to enter this race. I come to this race after my 30-year career of building large coalitions to win reforms for the public interest as a community organizer, a nonprofit executive, a state lawmaker, and as the elected leader of our county council. And for the last 2 years, I've had a front row seat that no other individual has had as the elected president and vice president of the council during the COVID crisis. And unfortunately, there's disorganization and decline and the poor fiscal management and the ethical and legal problems I've witnessed up close led me to give up my safe re-election to get the executive branch back on track. We just heard that we had austerity budgets. In fact, we had a record amount of federal funding. And where other jurisdictions spent that federal funding to build libraries and homeless shelters and other assets for their communities, our county executive spent hundreds of millions of dollars without council authorization, violation of the charter, on hazard pay and other things that were important to him.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. James. You're muted.
Sorry. Yes, my name is Peter James. I moved to Montgomery County when I was 4 years old. I spent 20 years out in Silicon Valley learning my high-tech trade, and I believe I'm the best candidate because I have the technical knowledge needed to automate very large organizations. I've done this for Fortune 500 companies, counties, cities, and even countries. We have a particularly unresponsive government, a lot of paper pushing. It takes 3 to 4 months to get someone hired in the county government. I will provide an open government system, an online portal called a digital twin, similar to SimCity. I will also return 100 million hours to the citizens who are stuck in traffic. I have.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Reamer.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us today. I'm Hans Reamer, and I am one of your at-large council members, and I'm a social change organizer. That's what I've devoted my life to. I came to Washington to fight to save Social Security, and I ran national campaigns to protect that program from privatization, and we won. I worked for AARP on community engagement and retirement security. I worked for Barack Obama in the 2007 primary. I was his national youth vote director, helping get young people involved in that historic, meaningful campaign, and we won. And I'm so excited to be here to serve you because I know that creating real change requires building a community and it requires strong democratic leadership. And I ran for the county council with those goals in mind. I've been working to move the ball forward on housing affordability, on technology, life sciences, and jobs, on creating city centers on Rockville Pike and along the Purple Line to allow farm breweries and wineries to create after-school programs to promote walkability and bikeability. I'm running for county executive so that this county can say yes to progress. I believe our leadership is stuck in the past and is not making change. We've got
Thank you, Mr. Reamer.
Thanks.
On to the questions. Data from the county's Department of Housing and Community Affairs indicates that annual construction of moderately priced dwelling units for sale and rent has dropped over the past 2 decades, even as the need for such housing has grown. The county executive has proposed a fiscal 2023 budget that includes $140 million for affordable housing initiatives. To Mr. Elrich, I ask, what other steps have you taken during your first term to increase the availability of affordable housing? And to the other candidates, I ask, do you support the proposed $140 million? And what else would you propose to meet the demand for various types of affordable housing? The order for this question will be Mr. Elrich, Mr. Blair, Mr. Reamer, Mr. James, and Mr. Hucker. Mr. Elrich, you have 2 minutes.
Just restate what you want me to answer.
Oh, sure. What other steps have you taken during your first term to increase the availability of affordable housing?
So we've done a number of things. One of the first things we did was put a piece of property that came up in the Twinbrook, not the Twinbrook, but the sector plan and on Bushy Drive in Wheaton. And we've created a project that's a number of different players in it, and we're going to have 192 units, and it's all affordable below 75% of AMI. I originally asked the nonprofits to bid on our parking lots. I told them that we would be willing to sell our parking lots. Not getting more than a tiny nibble. We've actually posted all the parking lots on the county website now, so that anybody who wants to build affordable housing can do that. And that's important. These are 17 lots. They're in Bethesda, they're in Silver Spring, they're in prime locations in Montgomery County. And they're lots where the county has minimal debt, and we can build on them pretty efficiently if people want to do projects. And the good thing about the county controlling it is that we can bring down the price. We're not in the private market. We're not buying private land. So that should reduce the price of these projects. I'm a big believer in rent stabilization. I think, we're watching rents go out of control. I would not put rent stabilization on new buildings and new construction, because that might deter additional construction, but I think there's a place for it. DC uses it, Tacoma Park uses it. It plays an important role in both jurisdictions' ability to actually preserve affordable housing, which is what we're in danger of losing. Rob Goldman told us years ago that we had lost about 35,000 affordable units in the beginning of this decade, actually the beginning of the century, over the first 10 or 12 years. We continue to lose affordable housing because the rents continue to go up and exceed the ability of our residents to be able to pay. We continue to partner.
15 seconds.
We partner very heavily with our nonprofit community. And if you go on the county's Department of Housing Affairs, you'll see a bunch of projects that we've done with the nonprofit community to bring more affordable housing to the county.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Blair, 2 minutes.
So I believe it's a fundamental right that if you work in this county, you should be able to afford to live in this county. And that's just not the case for so many. And when I'm meeting with, whether it's nurses or teachers or first responders, I'm lucky if half of them can afford to live here, and that has to change. And so I'm in favor of all sorts of initiatives to increase housing. The county estimates that we need, I think, roughly 31,000 new housing units by 2030. Last year, I think we were less than 1,500. We're not going to get there at this pace. And one of the things that we have this huge opportunity to build density around our metros. And it's been there for years. It's been zoned properly, and we haven't done it. So for example, Shady Grove, that's Shady Grove Metro. That's where I go most frequently. We have 35 acres there. That's where we keep our buses. Just think about how valuable that land is. And that could be the mixed income, mixed use neighborhoods where people want to live. It's where businesses want to start, right? I have a 25-year-old son. It's where he would want to live, where he could go down the elevator, jump on the metro, go to his job in DC. That's where we need to be investing. And it's also important to note how critically this is related to jobs, because developers intuitively know what I said, that people want to live near where they work. And so we've got to start creating jobs here. My campaign offices are not far from White Flint, and that's been zoned properly for decades. We even have tax incentives. But when I ask the learners, why aren't you building there? They're saying, David, because the jobs are in Virginia. So this is a fundamental issue that we've got to address. I would address it first by building near our metros, and that's going to be creating jobs to get the developers to start building those affordable housing units so that those nurses and teachers can afford to live here. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Reamer.
Well, thank you so much. Housing affordability is one of the most critical issues facing our community. And I'm a parent of two boys, they're 14 and 11. And I hope that they will be able to live in this county if they want to. But I'm worried. I'm worried that the door of opportunity is closing in Montgomery County for young people, for the workforce, for empty nesters, because of our housing shortage. We are a housing shortage community, like you see on the West Coast. And a housing shortage squeezes out affordability for vulnerable populations. It promotes homelessness. It makes it very difficult for vulnerable people to find access to housing, as well as younger people, empty nesters in the workforce. So we need to promote more housing in every different way. That's through the market and creating new housing construction. It's through affordable programs, nonprofit funded affordable housing that the county gets behind. It's through accessory dwelling units and duplexes and triplexes. We have to be creative and innovative. And we have an executive today who is anti-housing and has been anti-housing for decades. We need leadership in this county that is moving into the future and thinking differently about how we can grow and thrive and prosper. And we need a change in order to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. James, 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm very fearful of this transit-oriented development where we're taking the Chinese approach of factory towns by stacking people like cordwood in very small apartments. And they've got in China, they got people jumping off the roofs all the time just out of the conditions where many studies will show that the amount of space you're living in has a big impact on your mental health. My wife works at Shady Grove. A lot of the younger nurses are living in Frederick and Washington counties because they prefer maybe a single family home or more land, parks where the kids can play at. And what I plan to do, rather than have transportation oriented development, have people oriented development. So go to my website, pjames.us, and find out what personal rapid transit systems are. I can bring back 100 million hours of your time sitting in traffic. And if it only takes 20 minutes to get to Frederick rather than an hour in the morning commute, then we have many more options. We have access to affordable housing. Affordable housing, simply the cost of land, the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of site improvements, water, sewer, and then the burden that the county puts on. One thing I might do is ask the council to take all the taxes off the smaller developers that are trying to provide affordable housing to lower their cost, particularly the upfront costs. I believe we can
15 seconds.
We can keep our community as laid back as it is, rather than forcing this urbanization across the county that Thrive 2050 does.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. Yes, quality and affordable housing is a fundamental right for every resident. It's not only central to the American dream, it's a core principle of the Democratic Party since FDR, but it hasn't been a priority for this administration, and that's just a big difference among all of us. Our teachers, our firefighters, our nurses, our plumbers, the tax base that we need that do important work in Montgomery County every day in their prime earning years, they're unable to find housing in Montgomery County, so they sit in front of us on 270 and on the Beltway as they drive in from Frederick or Prince George's or Southern Maryland. I'm on the board of the Council of Governments. We hired the smartest nonpartisan experts from the urban institutes. We declared a housing crisis, and every one of the 24 jurisdictions in our area looked at the data and held hands and declared a housing crisis and set goals. The Post reported Mr. Elrich's views are so extreme on this that he's the only elected official that doesn't agree with the data-driven goals set by the Council of Governments and the unanimous conclusion of the County Council. So the budget sent over by the county executive is once again too modest. We need a leader who really believes in affordable housing and puts their money where their mouth is. We need a robust increase like Muriel Bowser has done, where she spent $1 billion over the last several years in affordable housing in the District of Columbia, and they're booming. They're building the housing units that they need and they committed to. In Montgomery County, our county executive didn't even build 30% of the units that we committed to last year. We need to protect our existing affordable housing. We need to buy up existing affordable and work with nonprofits to improve it. We need to leverage limited public funds with private funds. And I'm so committed to this, I won an award under my council presidency last year from the housing group Rebuilding Together for our record investment and innovative programming in affordable housing. We badly need a leader who believes in affordable housing, prioritizes it, and will build budgets that make it a priority. Build budgets around a priority and not as an afterthought. We can't have 4 more years of stagnation in this area. Thank you so much. appreciate the question.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Now, some of you may seek your 30 seconds for rebuttal time. Please put your hand up. Mr. Elrich, I see your hand is up. You have 30 seconds. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm not opposed to housing building. I'm opposed to building only the high end of the housing and not building a wider range of housing. And we continue, and just do the math on this. With current county policies, if we built 40,000 units over the next 10 years, you would get 6,000 MPDUs. You wouldn't get projects lower than MPDU prices, and you wouldn't get projects that fill the gap between MPDUs and higher market prices. So our policies make us fail. And if you want to change the policies, which I did not put in place, but other people put in place, we would be able to do more. But you got to have policies that match your goals. Our policies do not match our goals.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Reamer.
Thank you so much. You know, the executive likes to criticize the housing in Bethesda, and we all know Bethesda is one of the most expensive places in the region, but that housing is filling up with people who are leaving their housing and making room for other families to come in. But I would say to the executive, what about the Chevy Chase Library site? Well, will you recommend housing there, affordable housing in Chevy Chase on publicly owned land where you could make affordable housing happen? If not, I think that shows a lot about your agenda for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Hucker.
We just heard that the county executive has just no control over how much affordable housing we build. In fact, County Executive Leggett built a record amount of housing of all types: affordable housing, senior housing, disabled housing, housing for our young people, market rate and affordable. Under the same zoning rules, if anything, we've loosened up the zoning rules because we ended a failed housing moratorium. The county executive has to make it a priority rather than just making excuses. That's the difference. The county executive is holding up numerous projects that include lots of affordable housing in my district alone and elsewhere. And the county executive can drive higher standards for affordable units. The person just needs to make that a priority and negotiate.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Are there any further rebuttals? All right, we will move on. Early last summer, Empower Montgomery, a local business group, issued a report that found Montgomery County has been losing high-paying jobs and real estate investment to nearby jurisdictions. The county executive called this report a piece of garbage. Mr. Elrich, when we get to your turn, I would like you to explain why. And to the other candidates, I ask, do you support the recommendation that a $275 million fund be created using public money to provide grants and subsidies to private firms to encourage them to locate or expand operations here? The order for this question will be Mr. Reamer, Mr. James, Mr. Hucker, Mr. Elrich, and Mr. Blair. Mr. Reamer, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, great. That report was really important. What it described was that when you look at the strategic industries that will power Montgomery County's future, technology, life sciences, federal contracting, they have been shrinking over time rather than growing. That is afflicting this county. We have declining job opportunities. We have declining housing opportunities. That's why our kids don't have the future here that we once had. I have been working hard on policies to change that dynamic. I'll give you one example. Wireless, 5G. I have been leading a lonely battle for 6 years to allow our county's wireless infrastructure to modernize. How can you attract Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon to our county if you can't even put modern wireless infrastructure in place? Our county executive has been opposing me at every turn for actually it's now almost 8 years. We need leadership in this county that is facing the future and is leading our community forward. There are so many areas, but yes, to the very specific question, I do support stronger incentives. I don't know the exact number, but I am working with my colleagues on a proposal that will reflect in many ways that kind of approach. We have to do a better job recruiting companies into this county. We need some momentum here. We need a logic. We need companies to say, I want to be in Montgomery County. Today, they only say that if they want to work with the NIH. We need to have a broader economic base that is growing and adding resources for our community. And we're not going to get it without making some big changes and with some leadership that is willing to make some tough decisions to move us forward. And we just don't have that today, but we can put it in place. We have wind in our sails with growth in life sciences. It's time to strike. The iron is hot. We got to get housing right, transportation right, workforce right, economic development incentives right. We got to get all that right.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. James, 2 minutes.
Yes, I think we should support our local businesses here and not bribe people to come to Montgomery County. I'm proposing, and you can find this on my website, a personal rapid transit system. And the same lane can carry 15 times the amount of traffic as our highways, and also be able to serve the up county because these pods will be driven away. We're the second worst congested area in the entire nation. When someone that wants to open a headquarters here travels to Montgomery County and says, sits in traffic and says, oh, all my employees are going to be spending an extra hour on the road. If we go to state-of-the-art transportation and eliminate our traffic issue, then we'll naturally bring people. We'll have to fight them off with a stick from coming to Montgomery County. There's billions of dollars of boondoggle transit and transportation money that's going into obsolete 200-year-old technology, and I'm the person that can bring the county into the new age. So I would not look at creating a fund so that the oligarchy can pick and choose who they want to attract to the county.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. So the facts are the facts. As hard as it is to say, look, we're last in the region in job creation. This has been going on for the last 4 years. We were the only jurisdiction losing jobs before COVID during a huge national economic boom. Then during COVID, we lost 15,000 more jobs than neighboring jurisdictions, most of them held by women and people of color. And then now, coming out of COVID, we're still the only jurisdiction in the Washington region losing jobs. We're responsible for 38% of the job loss in the entire state of Maryland. That never happened under County Executive Leggett or Duncan. We need an economic development strategy that builds on our strengths and our unique assets. Number one, we have more entrepreneurs than almost anywhere in the nation. We need to support our small businesses and treat them like an asset, not like a burden. We have to do everything to make them succeed. We have an overly complicated tax system, planning system, permitting system, and very little support for our small businesses. Other jurisdictions, if you're starting a business, you get a whole team working with you to help you get your permits, have a marketing strategy that succeeds, find your commercial lease, everything you need. We don't have that in Montgomery County. We also need to increase the capital for them, particularly for minority women and disabled-owned business owners. And the county exec has let that program be endangered by violating the law, not doing the disparity study two times in a row. We need to focus on key strengths like life science and biotech and our 18 federal agencies, which give us a huge advantage if we would just use it compared to other jurisdictions. And we need to enhance our collaborations with nonprofits and WorkSource Montgomery to build the talent pipeline. I passed a Green Jobs Apprenticeship program to train young people to install solar panels, new windows, insulation, stormwater gardens, but it was years before the administration even started to implement it. There are so many of our young people who moved away in that time to find jobs elsewhere. And we have thousands of square feet of vacant commercial space that should be repurposed, changing state law to allow that to be used for childcare and schools and other needs that we really have in this county. I will be a county executive that makes economic development the #1 priority of this county, because without it, we never have the funding for all the unmet needs in social services we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Elridge.
So we've been prioritizing economic development since I came in here. The very first thing I tried to do was bring a partner to the learners at White Flint who was interested in redeveloping the White Flint property. I've been looking to jumpstart things since I walked through the door. So I spent 2 years getting an agreement with WMATA to do a joint development solicitation for a master developer on the White Flint property. They're writing up the solicitation. I spent 2 years working with the University of Maryland to get them to agree to invest in graduate programs here. We are the only life sciences center not anchored by a graduate university doing research. The university has agreed to bring a program, a very important program in computational biology over to Montgomery County. Also, they would also aid the hospitality industry. We reformed DPS and they've sped up their approvals, and we've gotten rave reviews from life sciences company and even Marriott for the way we handled their projects. We've created preferences for local businesses in our purchases. Worksource Montgomery was reformed by a joint effort of myself and the council because it was not working the way it was supposed to work. We all wanted it to change. We have an amazing leader, and instead of serving a few people, they're serving hundreds, if not thousands of people in Montgomery County. Those are all important changes. I don't believe in giving massive subsidies. When I talked to the economic development person who's now in Fairfax, he said, I wasn't successful by the subsidies I gave. They're just better promoters. And we have an economic development corporation, which reports to the council, which really hasn't done all the things. And I know the council has frustrations too, hasn't done everything we would like to see. But the fact is, they weren't successful. They weren't successful by subsidies. They were successful by actually addressing transit in the way the county's not been able to because we don't have the money to address it. And that leaves us behind. Virginia is able to build things that we can't build because they have a different tax structure, which I tried to introduce to the council, and they canceled the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Elridge. Mr. Blair.
So jobs. It drives so much of what we need in Montgomery County, right? Because the jobs are our tax base. I talked about how it impacts housing, impacts the environment, the quality of life to have jobs here. And yes, we are losing jobs. We have 4,600 less private sector jobs in Montgomery County today than we did 15 years ago, which is unbelievable that we could do that and seeing the population grow by 100,000 plus. And even worse than that is we're losing our high paying jobs. In fact, over the past 10 years, we've lost 35% of our IT jobs. Just think about that. We're in the information age. How could you lose 35% of your IT jobs? But yet our county council, county executives, leadership have made decisions that have driven those businesses away. And when I started our business 25 years ago in Rockville, Maryland, I didn't have a perspective. But as we grew the business and we ultimately had offices in 30 different states, I realized the most challenging place to do business was Montgomery County. And I'm not exaggerating, like it wasn't even close. And so much of it is about the relationships. It's about the procurement, inspections, permit, it's the culture. And so one of the things that I've put forth is a bill of rights for businesses. Like, what are we gonna do? Like, what do we need to do to attract businesses? And so, Ann, to your specific question about the $275 million, no, that's not gonna attract businesses here. What we need to do is support the businesses that are here today. We have great small businesses. We need to do a better job buying from them and helping them grow their businesses. I often do restaurant roundtables. And when I'm restaurant owners, I'll ask, who's planning on opening up another restaurant in Montgomery County? And you can't get people to. They said, David, it's just easier in Howard, Frederick, Prince George's, Northern Virginia. And so we've got to change the culture here.
15 seconds.
We have, so if you look at my economic development plan, which I put so much work into, it really leverages the assets that we have here in Montgomery County. And that full plan is on our website. If you'd like to look at it. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Now, some of you may seek 30 seconds for rebuttal time. Please put your hand up. Mr. James, 30 seconds.
Yes, we hear about, supporting our existing industries, the pharmaceutical, basically, sector and hospitality. You can't win a race with a two-legged horse. I proposed to the county to provide 100,000 free electric vehicles that could be given away. That was a $7.5 billion bump in the economy. As soon as I get into office, I will put out an RFP for 200,000 free electric vehicles. The money already exists. It's in the form of a $7,500.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Reamer.
Well, the county executive has talked about educational assets and building on them. The University of Maryland is right next to us, and the Purple Line has 4 stops on that campus, and it's coming right into downtown Silver Spring and downtown Bethesda. And yet the county executive proposed single tracking the Purple Line into downtown Bethesda rather than building an adequate tunnel there. That is not forward thinking. That is one of the most rear-facing decisions I've ever seen in Montgomery County government's history. We need leadership that is willing to do what it takes to move us forward. The University of Maryland is a major asset that we can build upon, and the Purple Line is going to help us get there. That's why I've been fighting for the Purple Line for 15 years.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Hucker.
I couldn't agree more. I was shocked at, I mean, the county executive has opposed the purple line for many years and reluctantly went along with it. But I was shocked when I saw the Department of Transportation, the secretary chastise the county executive for holding up the Capitol Crescent Trail tunnel as well, and suggest that he, can't hold up a regional asset like that, and that there was copious amounts of funds available at the state level, the regional level, the federal level, and that he'd be happy to apply for grants if our highly paid staff didn't have the time to do that. So
Thank you, Mr.
thank you.
Hucker. Mr. Elrich.
We did not hold up the purple line, and on the single tracking, I just asked them to study, because the alternative is building a $50 million 900-foot tunnel under Wisconsin Avenue for the bikes. I asked them to do a study whether they could do the switch of the trains that pull into the Purple Line station in Bethesda outside the tunnel rather than in the tunnel. If they could do that and pull into the docking station that way, which is like 900 feet away, you would save a fortune. We'd be able to put that money to other projects. I asked them to study it. They came back and concluded that that if the headways got too low, it wouldn't work. I didn't propose doing it. I didn't propose changing the budget, but you should study it. If it had saved $50 million, it would have meant a lot
Thank
to
you,
this county.
Mr. Elrich. If there are no further rebuttals, the county has set goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035. As of 2018, Montgomery County was only 19% of the way toward meeting those goals, according to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. Is it realistic to think that the 80% and 100% goals can be met within the deadlines? And what more needs to be done to speed up progress? The order for this question will be Mr. Blair, Mr. Elrich, Mr. Hucker, Mr. James, and Mr. Reamer. Mr. Blair, you have 2 minutes.
So on the environment, Montgomery County talks a good game. And it was 5 years ago that we declared a climate emergency. And then it took 5 years for us basically to get the first legislation in front of the council. Meanwhile, we were being lapped by the surrounding areas. And so some of the things that I would do right away, let's triple our solar power. We were up to 7.6 megawatts under Ike Leggett. Howard County, they announced a proposal late last year. They're going to get to 24 megawatts in 2 years, which is going to power half of their county government. We can do that by, there's a landfill that we use off of Goody. There's other county-based land that we could use. So solar, we've got to move with a sense of urgency. We talk about the tree canopy and how valuable that is to keep water out of our storm drains. And so my commitment is let's plant 10,000 trees a year. That's not a stretch. Baltimore County was planted at 11,000 last year. And then sometimes you also hear about the need to close our incinerator. That's a great idea, except for the first thing we need to do is figure out where we're going to send the trash that's going there. And 160,000 tons is food waste. So let's start with composting. Arlington County announced last year that they're the first in the region to do regular weekly curbside pickup for composting. Let's do that here. I would actually start with our public schools. It's a huge waste of food. And what I love about the schools is the children do such a great job of educating the parents. Because we get that 160,000 tons of waste out of the incinerator, maybe we actually have a chance to close it. So if we're going to meet those ambitious goals of zero greenhouse gas emissions, we've got to act with much more speed. And so those are 3 things that I would do right away to help us reach our goals.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Elrich.
So we're doing a number of things I think are going to make a difference. We have more electric buses than anyone, and we have a plan to electrify our fleet faster than anybody in the region. We're putting in multiple microgrids that actually will provide charging for the buses as well. We're working on a hydrogen project because we know that some of our buses are going to have to run on hydrogen for the longer routes, because you would need two electric buses to do the job of one hydrogen bus, at least with current technology. Our solar provider, which has been doing solar on county buildings, is now looking at all the county buildings. And after a conversation with the school systems agreed. They not only embraced our climate goals, which they hadn't done before, but they've also agreed to have us look at their properties for opportunities to put as much solar on their properties as possible. The big thing is that, we worked hard. I spent a lot of time working with Lord Charcudian at the state level to get community choice energy passed. And community choice energy is going to make Montgomery County the ultimate purchaser of power for all customers in Montgomery County. And it gives us the ability to shop for the cleanest energy at the best price. And we're the pilot for the state. And the state's going to look very closely at what we do. Environmentalists are very excited about this. We've had offers and discussions with people who provide clean energy, and this may be the quickest way to electrify our grid. And that's, to me, is really important to get this done. We continue to look at other options. We're working with GenOn about their property up in the Up County, about what they can do with solar over there. We've talked to Pepco about solar on their property, and they're very interested in working with us on solar projects for community solar with the property that they own. They
15
also
seconds.
have a large parcel up in the Ag Reserve that's contaminated, and they should be able to build solar on that. So we're advancing as many solar projects as we can advance. And unfortunately, state law is restricting the solar in the Ag Reserve. They've turned down everybody who's applied, and there is a waiting list, and there are no Montgomery County farms on the waiting list, and that's for the next 3 years.
Thank you, Mr. Elridge. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. Look, climate change is an existential, it's our greatest long-term threat. And that's why the council 5 years ago declared it an emergency. Since then, as David said, we've seen lots of talk and delay, and years before we were even sent a bill that I was promised to chair the Environment Committee back in 2019. The first budget we were sent over from the executive, took all the money out of the climate action plan, zeroed it out. So there would be no climate action plan. I had to put the money back in and get all the council, including Mr. Reamer, to vote for it. So that was great. Then they hire the contractor, and it's all politicized. We have instead of the quantitative analysis telling us where to spend money to get the greatest carbon reductions, we get this high school level report back for $400,000 that tells us these have big impacts and these have little impacts. It's a pretty useless report and doesn't give us the roadmap that we paid for. And unfortunately, all the controversial things for the administration's perspective were taken out. It doesn't mention land use. It doesn't mention the incinerator. It doesn't mention large scale solar. The chair of our Environment Committee in Annapolis called me and said, why isn't your climate action plan a plan? It even says in the foreword, it's not a plan. So buildings are the number1 source of carbon emissions. I recently passed the largest investment in fighting climate in county history, the Green Buildings Now Act, with your local council member, Councilmember Friedson. It invests 10% of the county's energy tax revenue in the Green Bank, and by doing so, leverages lots of private financing to retrofit our buildings for energy efficiency and renewables. Creates thousands of good jobs for our young people installing those assets, and will save our tenants and our small businesses millions of dollars on their utility bills. So it's win, win, win. Win for the climate, win for rent for commercial and residential tenants, and win for our energy bills. We need far more electric buses. We were promised we'd have electric buses for our bus rapid
15
transit,
seconds.
but we got longer, expensive diesel buses instead. As county executive, I've been in the environmental movement for 30 years. I'll make the environment and climate a priority and not just an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. James.
Yes, as the no BS candidate in the race, these proclamations of zero greenhouse gas emissions are sort of absurd. The county missed a third of when they did their inventory, they didn't do anything slightly resembling actually measuring greenhouse gas emissions. They missed a third of them in urban soils. Boston College did a study of urban soils in the Boston area and found out they made up roughly a third of all the greenhouse gas emissions. The county's telling people to go out and compost. Where do you think 80% of that carbon and nitrogen goes? In a compost pile? It goes in the atmosphere. So I'm the only candidate that knows that an elephant can't jump. For instance, a heavy double long bus causes 95% of the road damage, trucks and heavy vehicles. My proposed lighter vehicle is something that not only can use the transit to get you there much faster, but you can't drive a light rail train or a BRT bus home and park it in your garage. So the biggest thing is getting cars off the road. So by giving away a few 100,000 free electric vehicles, the fastest way to get those gas cars off the road is give away free electric ones. There's already funding available for that. I would reforest the Ag Reserve, not plant 10,000 trees, but plant 1 million trees a year, We probably, with the orchard type spacing, need about 7 million trees. If we have more dense
15 seconds.
forest, we're talking 20 million trees. I have robotics that can go and automate that and bring that cost of that down, which I proposed to the county tree farm. But none of these technologies ever get adopted by the county because we're 30 years behind
Thank you,
the-
Mr. James. Mr. Reamer.
Thank you so much. It troubles me deeply, as I know it does you, that the climate that we're living in today is much worse than the one that we had when I was a kid. And I want my grandkids to feel that we are moving in the right direction finally. And we can do it. I know and I believe that there is a path to slowing the trend that's causing climate change. And that path is by generating massive amounts of solar and wind energy, shutting down fossil fuel power plants, and then plugging everything into a clean electric grid, whether that's your car or your phone or your stove or whatever. Everything runs on clean electricity. In order to make that happen, 2 years ago, I proposed allowing property owners in our rural areas, agricultural areas, to install solar arrays, provided they grazed animals or grew crops underneath those arrays. County executive opposed it and helped the council water it down to the point where not a single project is moving forward, not a single one. The county executive's climate action plan points to Thrive as the land use part, helping us move towards a future that prioritizes walking and biking and public transportation. And yet the executive has actively campaigned against Thrive. Buildings are critical. We have to get the energy out of buildings and bring clean energy in. And that means reforming how buildings existing use energy, as well as how new buildings are built. And I'm proposing an electric building code next week to help us move in that direction. I want to say that David Blair and Mark Elrich, I think, have the same basic issue here. They don't want to take action. David Blair has opposed building standards at the local
15
level,
seconds.
doesn't support solar on the agricultural reserve. Mark Elrich can't get building standards done at the local level and also opposes solar at the agricultural reserve. So, we need a leader who's going to take action on climate and not just talk, and that's what I'll be.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Now for rebuttals, we'll start with Mr. Blair.
Well, I think that the precise reason that I'm running is because the lack of progress that this county has made on the environment. And when I think about how we're being lapped by the surrounding areas, this is what executive leadership is about. Executive leadership is about setting a goal. I'm going to triple the solar power, right? Like I set a goal and then we're going to move with a sense of urgency and get it done. We're not just going to talk about it. Like the proposals that you had in the ag reserve, right? I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of effort that was put into that, and there's nothing to be said for it.
Thank you,
Whereas
Mr.
what an
Blair.
executive does is gets things done, and that's why I'm running for county executive.
Mr. Elrich. You're muted.
The issue in the ag reserve is a fact, and you can just go to Potomac Edison. They've sent me an email explaining why we can't get our projects approved. That's just a fact. There was no incinerator in the plan because we'd already planned on getting rid of the incinerator. And I took the first money out of the first budget because we had to cut $90 million because of a shortfall in revenue from the previous budget that the county executive had produced. And we've planned in the first year to use a citizens group to put together the basic outlines of a plan. I didn't need someone as a climate czar in the first year. What I needed was to get the basics of a plan put together. And in the second year, when we had a plan we wanted to put into shape from implementation, that's when we brought the consultant on.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich.
You have to be
Mr.
careful
James.
about where you spend money, particularly when you don't have much.
Mr. James.
Well, the council's approved several $100 million to stack people on top of Metro, but the climate plan only has $100,000 for, quote, a climate expert, and that's about maybe 65,000 take home. You can't get an expert for that. I've spent a dozen years with First Fruits Farm building with interns a bunch of different types of renewable energy systems. I know the technology. I know what's capable.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Reamer.
David Blair has statements on climate. He does not have a plan. He's opposing solar where it can best be put on the ground. He has opposed having local building energy efficiency standards. Just saying that you're tripling the amount of solar is not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough. We need a real leader in this county to take action on climate. And Mark Elrich hasn't gotten the job done, and David Blair is definitely not going to get the job done.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Hucker.
It is funny to listen to this. There was a plan, I guess, to close the incinerator we just heard, but we still have the incinerator spewing out lots of toxic pollution every single day, 4 years after the county executive promised to close it. So I think we would need another county executive to get the incinerator closed. We've also spent hundreds of millions of dollars of unauthorized spending, but we heard that we have constrained budgets. They're only constrained where the environment's concerned, unfortunately, not where his political allies are benefiting. And third, of all of us, I'm the one that has the longest track record of bringing people together to solve problems and pass difficult environmental bills at both the state level and the county level. No question about that. Thank you.
Mr. Blair and Mr. Reamer have voiced support for Governor Hogan's plan to widen Interstate 270 and parts of the Beltway using private funds that would be recouped by toll lanes. This type of public-private partnership was also utilized in the construction of the light rail Purple Line, which is 4 years behind schedule and $4 billion over budget. To you two, I ask, what makes you confident this approach will relieve congestion on I-270 and the Beltway, a project even more complex than the Purple Line? And for the other candidates, at least two of you, Mr. Elrich and Mr. Hucker, have expressed opposition to the Hogan proposal. What steps would you propose to deal with traffic congestion on these roads? Do you oppose the use of toll lanes, and where would you find the money to pay for the construction work you favor? The order for this question will be Mr. James, Mr. Blair, Mr. Elrich, Mr. Hucker, and Mr. Reamer. Mr. James, 2 minutes.
Yes, I'm running partially because when I went to the planning board, Casey Anderson closed the meeting when I was going to testify on personal rapid transit to solve the 270 corridor problem for the corridor plan. Essentially, rather than thinking binary transit versus highways, I wouldn't put money into either one of those. I would build these personal rapid transit systems. There's one built 45 years ago in Morgantown, West Virginia, completely cleared up their traffic problem. It hasn't had a single crash resulting in a serious injury or death in 45 years. It achieved Vision Zero way back then. What we need is we dedicate in certain areas over 50% of the land area to cars, parking surfaces, and roadways. With a personal rapid transit system, for instance, on the 355, the BRT is going to require another 12-foot setback. What we can do is if we put a PRT, it'll take 1% of the land area. We can build it for a quarter the price and put it in 2 years earlier. And we can give back another 12 feet on either side. So we can get basically a 50-foot difference in a walkable street. We can put the 355 on a road diet and not have any backup. So please go to pjames.us and find out what my plan is to revive and bring the county into the 24th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Blair.
So we certainly need to fix the bottleneck at the American Legion Bridge, and we've been talking about that for decades. And as county executive, I need to make sure that we minimize the disruption on private property, that the P3 contract doesn't leave the tax holders holding the bag again, like the Purple Line, and then we minimize the environmental impact. But building bigger roads isn't going to solve our problem. So one is jobs, right? It was estimated 200,000 people were coming into the county every single morning for jobs because we don't have enough housing here. And the things that we can control and what I'm going to work on day one is what we can control. So one is ride on bus, right? So we own that, and we haven't looked at the bus routes in decades. I proposed 4 years ago making it free. It's temporarily free. Let's make that permanent. Let's make sure the bus stops and the bus routes are the most efficient places. Second, we've got to fix this north-south problem that we have. 355 is great. There's proposed BRT, but it's going to take decades to get the right of way for those lands to be redeveloped. And so what I've proposed is let's leverage adaptive traffic light signals, make the roadways more efficient so we can get a dedicated lane. Maybe it's just one dedicated lane and it's going south in the morning and north in the evenings. But if if BRT is going to be successful, you need a dedicated lane. And we saw this with Route 29, where it's in mixed traffic and it hasn't been well utilized. And speaking of 29, for sure, we need to fix it south in New Hampshire. We've got to have a dedicated lane there. And there's a proposal that was out there, I think it was like 5 years ago from Sean Emerson, about how we could use the median to do that. So I would focus on leveraging the assets that we have today to address these traffic issues. And secondly, it's starting to create jobs in Montgomery County so people don't have to get in their cars to leave each morning. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Elrich, 2 minutes.
Before I did any toll lanes and for anything, I would start by going to the federal government for infrastructure money. We got a lot of infrastructure money to build. The Woodrow Wilson Bridge, we should have been getting money for infrastructure to rebuild the American Legion Bridge. And we should have been looking for money to help us on I-270 in the upper part of the Beltway. I don't believe this project needs to be a toll lane. For sure, from Frederick all the way down to the spur and across the spur to where you hit 270, you could solve this problem with reversible lanes. The traffic is very directional. It's north-south in the morning, south-north in the evening. I drive this every day. The northbound traffic is not there to justify 2 additional lanes, little Synecdoche, for probably 20 hours a day. So I would have used reversibles. When I talked with Greg Slater and proposed 2 other ways of dealing with the Beltway, he said those are the two other ways I proposed were actually proposals of competitors for Transurban that would have eliminated going into the neighborhoods and kept the project confined to the existing walls of the Beltway. So I'm not a believer that this thing needs to be a toll project. I think we need to exhaust, trying to get federal resources first before we go looking to put this into tolls. And if you do it as reversibles, we have the right of way to do this all the way up to Frederick without going outside the walls or coming anywhere near the walls. And that's why the council supported it when O'Malley first proposed adding 4 lanes to the Beltway. And the council said, led by me and Phil Andrews, that no, we don't want to do 4 lanes. We want you to look at reversibles. And so reversibles would actually
15
work.
seconds.
Those are the big things on that. I mean, the project right now stops at the ICC. There's no plan to go north of it. There's a story that there's not enough revenues, and I believe that would be generated north of the ICC to justify it being a toll lane, and that's really terrifying that this project will start and stop and make a massive traffic jam where the lanes condense down from the expanded lanes to no additional lanes north of the ICC.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. So the goals are relieve congestion and reduce the cost and maximize the transparency, right? Number one, this project and it's in the limited places it's needed, like the American Legion Bridge, which the council's been asking for state help for years, should be funded with state and federal money and not as a P3. P3s are unaccountable, they're much less transparent, and they create this conflict that isn't designed to reduce congestion because they're designed to maximize the profit margin. If you wanted to reduce congestion, you would start on 270 up north, where it's much more constrained with everybody moving into driving in from Frederick because they can't find affordable housing in Montgomery County. But the P3 project under Governor Hogan doesn't start with that because that part's not profitable. And it maximized, it started with the northern portion of the Beltway, which is extremely constrained now. And that was the most profitable. So even though it didn't meet the test set by our planning department, our nonpartisan planning experts at the planning department and the Department of Transportation believe that widening the northern part of the Beltway would not bring congestion relief, but that's in the Hogan proposal because it's the most profitable. Number two, I went to the state multiple times and proposed a diversion alternative that they at the time said they adopted using the ICC, which is already paid for, not the northern part of the Beltway, which would be much more sensible. And third, the governor proposed this saying that taxpayers would be held harmless. We need taxpayers and ratepayers to be held harmless. We learned, thanks to a whistleblower at WSSC, that the project would cause $1 billion in water bill increases due to utility relocations. I was very surprised the county executive built $182 million into the WSSC rate
15 seconds.
capital budget that would be on the backs of WSSC ratepayers. So I removed that from the budget because ratepayers and taxpayers shouldn't be paying for this project. We need to focus on nonpartisan recommendations to reduce congestion and protect taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Reamer.
Well, thank you. Let me start just by saying that I oppose widening the Beltway through Silver Spring, and I always have. And I was very happy when the governor dropped that from his plan. That was the county's strong negotiating objective, was to get the governor to drop that. County has always supported widening the bridge and adding capacity to 270. However, we have to have a strong connection to Virginia. We cannot afford to cut ourselves off from the most powerful economic center in our region. And so the only thing, other candidates today are describing their support for free highway lane expansion. Tolling will at least limit the sprawl. So I think from a climate perspective, free highway expansion will lead to far worse outcomes than tolling expansion. I will say that this is not the only answer. We have got to restore funding for Metro, which is in a crisis now because folks are not riding Metro again. We have to redevelop Rockville Pike and the Purple Line corridor so that future housing is walkable and bikeable. We have a whole wide array of transit-oriented development policies that we need to put in place, but we also must have a vital functioning connection in a 270 corridor that can be a future home to a burgeoning life sciences sector and our future growth potential as well. So, as a county council member, I have taken the heat and provided leadership in ways that I think have been, effective and important. And I use those tolls when I go to Virginia. And if you don't use those tolls, go ahead and criticize. But I use them when I go to Virginia. That's the world we live in.
Thank you. Now for rebuttals, Mr. Elrich, 30 seconds.
So a couple of things. Tolls. The people who can afford the tolls will pay the tolls, and the traffic on the non-toll lanes is kept miserable enough that people will be willing to pay to jump out of the non-toll lanes. We shouldn't be increasing misery in order to get toll riders. We should not do this with tolls. The other thing, and this is a technical thing, but you don't start up in Frederick. You actually start at the American Legion Bridge. When you've got a plug, you unplug the plug first, and then you see what happens to traffic flow, and then you work your way from the plug in the other direction to make sure you make the appropriate adjustments in the rest of the roadway. But it would be very easy for the state to actually literally paint in another lane on upper I-270. I've asked them to look at doing this just like they did between the Spur and Falls Road. There's a lane that they had there for literally the cost of paint, and we should be doing it.
Mr. James.
Yes, here's my solution. Go look at it on the website. We have to, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. Our leaders are insane. None of these solutions will work. This is the solution I propose for the American Legion Bridge. It requires no rebuild. It doesn't even need reinforcement, but it will increase the throughput on the bridge by at least double, if not 4 or 5 times. And
thank you, Mr. James. And for civility, let's not refer to our rivals as insane. Mr. Reamer.
Thank you. I want to say, especially to our environmental advocates here, what the county executive has now advocated for several times today, and today is not the first time, is that rather than having additional lane capacity be told, it should be free. That's the difference. I know he gets a lot of credit for seeming to fight against the highway expansion from a climate perspective, but he's advocating for more lanes that are free. That is far worse from a climate perspective. So I think folks need to get their head around what the county executive is actually saying.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Blair.
I just want to add one thing that didn't come up in this transportation conversation is the MARC rail. We actually have a real benefit there. So one of the first things I would do is improve the parking at the Germantown MARC station, because so many people can't even get on the train. This was pre-pandemic because of the lack of parking. And then one of the things that we have in our master plan is putting a MARC stop at the Shady Grove stop for Metro. So we've got to do a better job of leveraging the infrastructure that's in place today to relieve the congestion.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Montgomery County prides itself on its diversity. The most recent census data show people of color make up the majority of residents of the county. Black residents and Hispanic residents each account for 20.1% of the population. Asian American residents make up 15.6% of the population. Women account for 51.6% of the population. Many issues the county faces today stem from historic inequity and discrimination. Yet this assemblage of rivals for the Democratic nomination in its demographics does not, on its face, encompass the diversity of the county. What do you have to say about that? Do the demographics of decision makers matter? If so, what do you feel is your responsibility to address it? The order for this question will be Mr. Hucker, Mr. James, Mr. Reamer, Mr. Blair, and Mr. Elrich. Mr. Hucker, 2 minutes.
Thanks, Ann. That's a great question. Look, we are who we are and who we're born. And it's very important for a lot of reasons that we have diversity in our elected officials. We don't control what anybody else, who runs and who doesn't run for an office like this. But what I think is even more important is what our records are. And unlike anyone else in this race, I've been a community organizer, a nonprofit executive, a state legislator, a county council member with an unrivaled record of fighting for issues that benefit people of color and disadvantaged low-income residents of all types in Montgomery County and the state for many, many years. My record on environmental justice, my record on affordable housing, my record just the last few years, keeping buses free when the executive branch has tried to raise them, when we know our buses now, the data show 3/4 of our riders are people of color, and they average $35,000 a year in their wages. There's no reason that we should be raising bus fares on our riders, but that's what our executive proposed, and that's what I led the council to keep free. The work I've done for years, raising wages in Montgomery County, writing and passing the first living wage law, writing and passing the first state living wage law, and fighting to raise the minimum wage in Montgomery County, fixing the legislation after county executive, after it was vetoed, to round up the votes for my amendment to unanimously pass the minimum wage in Montgomery County and raise the wages for thousands of people, of our low wage workers, fighting for affordable housing, being honest about the fact that we have a housing crisis. And what you heard me say earlier, we need to invest $1 billion like Muriel Bowser did in building affordable housing in Montgomery County, because the right to a living wage job, the right to affordable housing is an absolute right and core to the American dream and a core democratic value. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hucker. Mr. James.
Yes, none of the other candidates will want to step up to the plate and defend basically an African-American killing ground called Moses Cemetery. And we can do something about memorializing that site. And all the candidates have refused to even address it or blame it on their lawyers. What I would do immediately is by providing 200,000 free electric vehicles, we provide access to the jobs and the amenities that we all take for granted. So being able to travel to, find and hold a job with your own vehicle is a tremendous leg up. So the ability to access higher wage jobs. I've spent a lot of time over the last 12 years with First Fruits Farm, a nonprofit, working with lower income interns to teach them programming, artificial intelligence, renewable energy systems, and those type of skills that are going to be able to do them well in the future. I think we need to have AI applied to our hiring. It was found that Goldman Sachs increased their diversity in hiring by 26% just by pre-screening the candidates with artificial intelligence. There was a lot of racial biasing found at the Social Security Administration on claims. The white guy got his claim and the person of color didn't. So they applied AI.
15 seconds.
And we're also able to achieve diversity. So there's a lot of things we can do to, we shouldn't have an old white guy sitting there picking out the bus stops and things like that, because that's not the correct way to provide
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Reamer.
diversity.
Thank you so much. Well, living in a world where women and people of color are freely able to hold positions of power at the same proportion as white men, a proportion to their share of the population. That's the world I want to live in. And that's why I'm a Democrat. And that's why I've spent my life working in social change. And I'm not going to stop. And it's why in March of 2007, I packed up my car and I drove to Chicago. And I spent the next year working to elect the first Black man as president of the United States. It's why I believe so passionately in electing Hillary Clinton when in 2016. I will say David Blair did not bother to vote in the 2008 Democratic presidential primary, which was a profound moment of historical importance in changing the face of who leads this country. As a county elected official, I have supported minority candidates at every possible turn, and I will continue to do that as county executive. And I will continue to advance equitable measures to support the well-being of our whole community. So it's core to why I'm in politics. And I look forward to working with community leaders to change the dynamics in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Blair.
Yes, Anna, it's disappointing that we have 5 white men running for county executive. It does not reflect Montgomery County. I'm really pleased with the diversity for the candidates running for county council, and presumably in future years, perhaps they'll be running for county executive. I absolutely believe there's power in diversity. As I've put together teams throughout my entire career, I recognize that, whether it's race, gender, age, occupation, even geography, where they're from. The more diverse you can get, the more powerful the team. And there's no doubt that this forum would be better this morning if we had more diversity. We'd have different ideas, fresh ideas that would move this county forward. That's what you'll see in my administration. After I lost the election 4 years ago by 77 votes, I didn't just sit back. I actually set up, I doubled down. And one of the initiatives that I pursued as related to equity was I co-founded a program called Rise and Run. And what it was is a training program so that Black leaders can get the training they need to run for office. I worked with Kelly Leonard on this. We had over a dozen candidates that went through the program. It was about a year-long program. And it showed them everything from raising money to marketing to putting together a team. And I'm thrilled that 3 of those graduates, they graduated last September, are actually running for county office, or not county office, but they're running for office today in Montgomery County. And so those are the types of programs that I will pursue, because clearly I believe in the power of diversity, and that's what my administration will reflect.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Elrich.
So for years, I've worked with tenants in this county, going back to 1980, to prevent displacement, and in some cases to actually help tenants buy their own buildings and when they were threatened with displacement. I've been working to try to keep things as equitable as possible and prevent the loss of housing for people for a very, very long time, and I continue to do that work. But I did 2 things that, address your point directly. In 2002, I was going to run in District 5. I had union support. And they came to me and said, there's a minority candidate who wants to run. District 5 is a majority minority district. We think it's time for a minority candidate. Would you step aside and run at large so a minority candidate could run in your district? That candidate was Tom Perez, and I stepped aside so he could run in that district. In 2006, when Tom was off the council, I was going to run for District 5 again and had the same support. And then a candidate who was Black said they wanted to run in that district. They served on the school board. And I was asked, would I do the same thing? Would I run at large so that a minority candidate could run in my district? I stepped aside again, ran in 2006, and this time I won. So I've made the personal sacrifice of helping make room for somebody in a minority position to sit on the council when I didn't have to do that. And I don't know if anybody else who's done that. You don't hear stories like that. But I thought it was important, and I was glad the union recognized that, you know, we had to have minority representation on the council. So I've been doing this for a long time. I believe in it firmly. I was engaged in the civil rights movement in the 60s at the University of Maryland. I worked at civil rights there, integrating the
15 seconds.
campus. And there was a neighborhood on the other side of the campus that lacked streets and water service. And I actually worked with that neighborhood to get Prince George's County to bring them streets and water service. So again, this is a long-term commitment for me.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Any rebuttals? No. Okay. The attendees have submitted questions that we're happy to share, came from those viewing this webinar. Here's the first one. And just for the ground rules, this is more of a speed round. You'll have 1 minute to answer and 30 seconds to rebut. One question is, there is a mental health crisis in Montgomery County. The pandemic has exacerbated this problem, especially for seniors and youth. What steps would you take, including budget priorities, to help the citizens of Montgomery County? The order for this question will be Mr. Blair, Mr. Reamer, Mr. Elrich, Mr. James, and Mr. Hucker. Mr. Blair, 1 minute.
We have a crisis, mental health crisis. It was before the pandemic. It's only gotten worse. We've got to double down on our funding to the great organizations that we already have in Montgomery County, like Cornerstone Montgomery and the Laurie Center. We've got to think about how we get more resources to the schools, both in person and through telehealth. It's something that I advocated for many times. I would put social, emotional, and wellness classes in our high schools. I would look to put them in our middle schools, because we've got to start, it's funny how we have kids, right? We have PE, right? We have physical exercise, but we don't talk about their mental health. So I would put those classes. And then lastly, we got to look at more residential services. And we have programs in the county, but there's often a wait list or a limited capacity, particularly for folks facing homelessness that may have mental health challenges. We need a place for them. And so those are the types of things that I would do to address the mental health tsunami that we're facing.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. I'm actually going to institute a last-minute rule change just to speed us along. We will not do rebuttals on the reader questions. Mr. Reamer.
Well, the mental health crisis was beginning before COVID, but COVID just amplified it, 1,000-fold. And we have to spend a lot more effort in our schools, especially for kids, and also through community mental health resources to address this challenge in our schools. I am strongly supporting a proposal we are working on through the council now to create student wellness centers in every one of our high schools. I also believe we should hire social workers and have them working in the schools with kids who are at risk and creating school safety campaigns. I would like to engage the administration, the coaches, the teachers, the faculty, the staff in the schools, parents and families in student health, safety, and wellness campaigns. I think we need to create a culture of safety and wellness, and we can do that if we get really focused and intentional about it. It's got to be a bigger priority for us as part of our program for academic success and student success.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Elrich. You're muted.
there's a lot we can do with schools. And I worked with Dr. McKnight to come up with her proposal to put 2 social workers in every school. And my only difference with the council was, since our budget didn't support it, we asked the school system to carry the cost for the first couple of years out of their federal money, which they agreed to do. But I think the bigger issue is this isn't just a school problem. And when I was growing up in the county had mental health clinics around the county. We don't have them anymore. And we know the problems with private insurance. So I'm meeting with Adventist. I've asked them to make a proposal on what it would take to reintroduce community mental health clinics into the
15
county.
seconds.
I think this would help people, not just students, but young adults and others who are suffering mental health crisis. This is, as you can see from the crime that's happening here, this isn't just a kid issue. This is a community issue.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. James.
Yes, our family's had direct experience with the mental health system in the county. Essentially, if you are in a crisis, they throw you in essentially a solitary confinement cell. It's very not very therapeutic in my mind. In order to actually have the funding to do this, I'll bring home several $1 billion a year worth of saving that we throw away on our transportation boondoggles to apply. We've had a 50% increase, particularly in young women committing suicide nationally. We need to get to the bottom of it. Is this because they spent more time on social media when they were out of school, and exactly what these problems are before we can really address them? Maybe we need to look at more anti-bullying or the ability to filter or support the people that are in crisis that may not choose to go through the existing crisis route, whether it's stigma.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. This is a great question. Our whole community is in crisis, especially we were before COVID, and it's far worse after COVID, especially our seniors who are grappling with isolation and loss, and our young people. I fought hard when I was a council president last year to get 26 social workers, 1 in every high school. And Mr. Elrich, as he said, wanted the school system to pay for it. We were happy to have the school system pay for it. The superintendent was, but Mr. Elrich and HHS declined to support that proposal. So only 3 of us on the council supported it. And now social workers weren't there in September when the schools reopened after virtual learning. And we've lost 10 of our young people to suicides and overdose, and 1 homicide since January. We'll never know if we could have saved those lives, but we have a responsibility to do everything we could to have saved those lives and provided those young people with the mental health support they need. Our students are in crisis. I called a town hall. 5,500 people came out to talk about the crisis they're living through. We also need more mobile crisis units. They were never called when Ryan LaRue was just shot by our police in Gaithersburg with 23 bullets, no mobile crisis unit on the scene. We need more counselors in our schools as well. We need more residential beds, and we need a juvenile mental health court, the type of which my wife helps run in DC for all the undiagnosed.
Thank you, Mr.
young
Hucker.
people. Thank you.
Our last question, this comes from reader Sheldon Fishman, who asked, what is your philosophy on public campaign financing? Why are you using it or not? The order for this question will be Mr. Elrich, Mr. Hucker, Mr. James, Mr. Blair, and Mr. Reamer. Mr. Elrich, 1 minute.
So I'm a big supporter of public financing. I supported the introduction of the bill in Montgomery County, worked with Phil Andrews to get this bill in. I think it is what we need to do to take the money out of politics, as far as you could take it out of politics. I wish this was a requirement in all elections, frankly. But I totally supported. I participated in the last election, and I had to freeze my funds. Any money I had left over in my campaign from the previous year, I couldn't use. At the end of the campaign, I had to return all unused funds to the state. So I have no qualms about using the system, and I think it's the right thing to do. And people shouldn't try to game the system.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. Mr. Hucker.
Thanks, Ann. many years ago, as a public interest advocate in Annapolis, I fought very hard to pass the Blue Ribbon Commission and the enabling legislation that allowed Montgomery County and now Howard County and other places to have public financing, because it's an important tool to lower the cost of entry to campaigns and to allow more candidates to get into the system. I've always voted to support the public financing law in Montgomery County and to fund the fund. It has some flaws in it. I wasn't on the council when it was written, but other public financing laws like Maine, Arizona, and New York City, places where I used to fly in state legislators to testify in Maryland, they all have a off-ramp where if you're running against a privately funded multimillionaire,
15 seconds.
you qualify for more money. The authors of our law in Montgomery County didn't create that. So it's very important, I think, that we improve the law we have in Montgomery County, but I've always been very supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hooker. Mr. James.
Yes, unfortunately, the current law prohibits late entries. There's for county executive, $40,000 initial funding rate you have to raise. And if you're not a career politician who starts a year early, public financing is not available. I would like to see money completely out of elections. We have a paperless airplane newsletter that I keep getting other candidates sending me emails from, but it's not available to candidates that are not in the know. These are people that sign up to be informed about the government. So
15
making that
seconds.
list available would be preferable to throwing money in a campaign, because that limits the voters' choices. So being able to use social media, maybe some laws that prevent social media companies from limiting speech would be very useful.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Blair.
I'm in favor of public financing because it gets more candidates running for office. And as I said in one of my responses earlier, there's power in that. And so the more candidates we get running, the better the ideas. Like even this morning, I didn't, Peter mentioned planting trees with drones, right? I didn't know about that. So the more diverse candidates, the larger the pool of candidates, the better the ideas are. And public campaign financing certainly drives that. And I'll be supportive of that. For me personally, I'm not a lifetime or longtime politician. I came from the business background. I'm incredibly blessed that our company was successful based on the talent that we had here in Rockville, Maryland. And so I'm not taking public campaign financing, but I'm certainly in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Mr. Reamer.
Well, I am a public finance candidate, and what that means is I'm running for county executive, and I'm not taking any contributions from PACs. I'm not taking any corporate contributions, and I'm not taking any contributions larger than $250. And I'm really proud to be part of this system, because over the years, Montgomery County's government has been deeply influenced by special interests. And I want you to know that the positions that I take are positions that I believe in. And I'm not taking these positions in order to get large contributions to help me get elected. I'm simply taking the positions that I believe matter for the future of this county. And by supporting public finance, I hope that I'm building more trust and confidence in my leadership, as well as helping to profoundly change Montgomery County government and politics. I look forward to the day when every candidate
15
will
seconds.
gladly participate in public financing. I believe they all should now. And I think when we get to that point, we will have a much better, more effective and responsive local government. And that's why I'm running for county executive as a public finance candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. On that note, we're going to wrap it up. On behalf of all of us at Bethesda Beat and Bethesda Magazine, thank you to the candidates for sharing their views. Thank you to you, the audience members, for choosing to spend your time with us, learning about the candidates ahead of the primary election. Please keep an eye out for more events we're planning, and please keep reading and supporting Bethesda Magazine and Bethesda Beat. We appreciate you. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you, Ann.